Every year, Americans spend over $70 billion on weight loss products, pills, powders, shake programs, subscription meal plans, and devices that promise to reshape your body while you sleep. $70 billion. And yet, the rates of obesity, metabolic dysfunction, and abdominal fat accumulation in adults over 60 have never been higher. Here's what the diet industry doesn't want you to sit with too long. The most clinically validated fat-burning compounds on Earth were growing in fields, gardens, and forests long before the first supplement company ever printed a label. They were eaten by civilizations that somehow managed to stay lean, energetics, and metabolically vital well into old age, without a single gym membership. Macro tracker. All. Appétit suppressant capsule. Today, we're counting down 13 of those foods, ranked from powerful to extraordinary, each one backed by modern science, each one carrying the fingerprints of ancient wisdom from cultures that understood metabolic health through centuries of careful, daily observation. Pay close attention when we reach number 1. It's something you've almost certainly had in your kitchen for years. And the specific way most people prepare it is actually destroying the compound that makes it work. And stay with us through number 7, because that's where we'll tell you about a monastic community in the Austrian Alps that survived a devastating winter famine in the 14th century on a single food. Their story isn't just remarkable. It's a biochemical lesson that modern obesity researchers are only beginning to understand. Number 13. Green tea. 4,000 years ago, Chinese Emperor Shen Nong was boiling water beneath a wild tree when dried leaves drifted into his clay pot. According to ancient records, he noted the resulting infusion sharpened his mind, settled his digestion, and gave him a clarity that lasted for hours. He documented it. His physicians studied it. Within centuries, the green tea had traveled across Asia and become the foundational beverage of Buddhist monks who needed sustained metabolic energy, not stimulation, but a clean, steady burn through hours of seated meditation and physical labor. In traditional Ayurvedic medicine, it was prescribed for what practitioners called heavy constitution, the ancient term for sluggish metabolism. In traditional Chinese medicine, it was classified as a bitter cooling herb that dispersed what physicians described as stagnant energy. Both systems, independently, pointed to the same physiological reality. Modern nutritional science has now mapped that reality with molecular precision. Green tea contains 2 compounds that work in tandem: caffeine, which activates the sympathetic nervous system and signals fat cells to release stored energy into the bloodstream, and a family of polyphenols called catechins, specifically one called EGCG. Epigallocatechin, gallate. EGCG inhibits an enzyme called catechol O-methyltransferase, which normally breaks down norepinephrine, the neurotransmitter that tells fat cells to mobilize. When that enzyme is suppressed, norepinephrine stays active longer. Fat release is sustained, and the body's fat oxidation rate measurably increases. Clinical research, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, confirmed this effect across multiple populations, with meaningful increases in fat oxidation, both during exercise and at rest. Here is the preparation detail that almost every guide omits. The catechins in green tea, particularly EGCG, are highly sensitive to temperature. Water above 80 degrees Celsius begins to degrade these compounds before they ever reach your cup. Most people brew green tea the same way they brew black tea, with boiling or near boiling water. This is a mistake. The ideal brewing temperature is 70 to 75 degrees Celsius water that steams gently but does not bubble. Steep for 2 to 3 minutes. Adding a squeeze of lemon after steeping, not during, provides ascorbic acid that protects the catechins through your digestive tract, increasing their bioavailability by up to 3-fold. 3 to 4 cups daily, brewed with this precision, is the dose range most research supports for meaningful metabolic effect. The Japanese Zen masters who preserved this brewing protocol weren't being ceremonially fussy. They were, without knowing it, practicing phytochemical preservation. Number 12. Chili peppers. Chili peppers appear in Aztec and Mayan texts as both food and medicine. The Aztec physician Martín de la Cruz documented their use in the Codex, written around 1552, describing their role in warming the body, stimulating the digestive fire, and treating what he called sluggishness of the blood. Spanish conquistadors brought chili back to Europe, where it was initially dismissed as a primitive folk medicine. 4 centuries later, the specific molecule responsible for these effects has been isolated, synthesized, and studied in clinical trials. That molecule is capsaicin. It binds to receptors, called TRPV. 1. Channels your body's pain and heat sensors, and triggers a cascade adrenaline release, elevated heart rate, increased core temperature, and accelerated calorie burn. This is thermogenesis, the production of body heat as a metabolic byproduct, and it is one of the mechanisms your body uses to access stored fat. Studies show capsaicin can increase metabolic rate by up to 8% in the short term. Research published in the European Journal of Nutrition found that meals containing capsaicin led to significantly lower calorie intake at subsequent meals, partly through suppression of ghrelin, the hormone that drives hunger. What most people don't know, capsaicin's thermogenic effect is meaningful only when consumed consistently. A single meal with chili won't move the needle. Daily consumption over weeks, however, produces a cumulative effect on both thermogenesis and appetite regulation. There's also a lesser-known compound in chili peppers called dihydrocapsiate, found in sweet peppers, that activates the same receptors without any burning sensation, which is useful for those who find heat difficult to tolerate. Add cayenne to eggs and soups. Use fresh chili in stir-fries. It works precisely because it feels like it's working. Number 11. Ginger. Ginger appears in the oldest surviving medical texts of 3 entirely separate civilizations. In the ancient Indian compendium, Karaka Samhita, written over 2,000 years ago, it is described as a universal medicine recommended for circulation, digestion, and what physicians called kindling the digestive fire. Ancient Egyptian papyri from 1550 BCE reference it as a digestive tonic. Chinese physicians of the Han Dynasty used it to treat what they described as cold and stagnant metabolic function. 3 civilizations, the same plant, the same physiological observation. Ginger's primary bioactive compounds, gingerols, present in fresh ginger, and shogalls, which concentrate in dried and cooked ginger, have measurable effects on metabolic rate, blood sugar, and appetite. A study in the journal Metabolism found that men who consumed ginger with breakfast reported significantly greater satiety and a stronger thermogenic response compared to a control group. Another study showed ginger extract improved insulin sensitivity and reduced fasting blood sugar in people with type 2 diabetes. The mechanism most people miss when blood sugar spikes and crashes. Ghrelin surges. You become ravenously hungry. You overeat. Ginger works partly by stabilizing that curve, blunting the peaks, and reducing the valleys that produce urgent craving. There's also a compound called 6, paradol, found in high concentrations in dried ginger, that specifically activates brown adipose tissue, the body's heat-generating fat. Brown fat, unlike white fat, actually burns calories to produce warmth. The research on 6, paradol and brown fat activation is still developing, but the direction is consistent. Ginger may activate a fat-burning tissue that sits dormant in most adults. Fresh ginger grated into warm water with lemon every morning. Aim for 1 to 2 grams of actual ginger daily. The research consistently finds that dose matters. Number 10. Cinnamon. Cinnamon appears in the Bible's Book of Exodus as one of the ingredients in the sacred anointing oil, a formulation given directly to Moses on Mount Sinai. It was also listed in the ancient Egyptian Ebers Papyrus as a medicine for digestive and circulatory disorders. In medieval Europe, it was worth more than silver by weight. Arab traders controlled its supply, and invented elaborate myths about its origin to protect their monopoly. Civilizations do not spend centuries fighting over a spice with no utility. Here is the utility. Cinnamon contains compounds, primarily cinnamaldehyde, and a water-soluble polyphenol called MHCP, that mimic the action of insulin at the cellular level. They increase glucose uptake in muscle cells, improve insulin receptor sensitivity, and slow the rate at which carbohydrates are digested and absorbed. A meta-analysis published in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics found that cinnamon supplementation significantly lowered fasting blood sugar in people with insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome for adults over 60. This matters enormously. Insulin sensitivity naturally declines with age. As cells become less responsive to insulin, blood sugar stays elevated longer after meals, driving more fat storage, signaling more inflammation, and greater difficulty losing abdominal fat. Cinnamon directly addresses this age-related metabolic drift. The critical distinction: most guides skip Ceylon cinnamon and cassia cinnamon are sold interchangeably in most grocery stores. But only Ceylon cinnamon, sometimes labeled true cinnamon, contains meaningful amounts of MHCP without significant coumarin, a compound that can stress the liver in large daily doses. For therapeutic daily use, seek Ceylon. Specifically, half a teaspoon to 1 teaspoon daily, stirred into oatmeal or warm water every morning, is the dose that clinical studies have used. Number 9. Oats. In the winter of 1315, a frost destroyed grain harvests across much of Central Europe. What followed was one of the worst famines in medieval history. Entire villages perished, but certain monastic communities in the Alpine regions, who had for centuries maintained oat cultivation as a staple crop, others considered peasant food, survived with their populations largely intact. Medieval chroniclers noted that these communities seemed to maintain physical vitality through months of near starvation. Their monks continued their labor. Their residents did not develop the edema and wasting seen in surrounding villages on wheat-only or meat-based rations. Modern nutrition historians, looking back at this record, now understand why. Oats contain beta-glucan, a soluble fiber that forms a viscous gel in the digestive tract. That gel slows the movement of everything through the intestines, reduces the rate of glucose absorption, blunts post-meal blood sugar spikes, and creates a prolonged satiety that research has confirmed is measurably superior to equivalent calories from other grains. A study published in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition found that oat consumption increased satiety and reduced hunger significantly more than an equivalent calorie portion of cold cereal. Despite identical calorie counts, beta-glucan also feeds beneficial gut bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids molecules that signal the release of GLP-1, the appetite-suppressing hormone. That isn't just satiety management. It's something deeper, a communication between the food, your gut microbiome, and your brain's hunger circuitry. The monastic physicians who observed these effects over generations couldn't name the mechanism, but they preserved the practice: steel-cut oats with cinnamon and a tablespoon of ground flax. This is the breakfast that biochemically protects the rest of your day. Number 8. Avocado. The avocado's medicinal history predates written records. Aztec healers used avocado seeds to treat skin conditions and digestive disruption. The Totonac people of coastal Mexico consumed the fruit specifically during periods of illness to restore physical resilience. When Spanish physician Francisco Hernandez documented Mexican plants in the 16th century, he noted that avocado was consumed by laborers specifically because of its ability to sustain energy through long physical work without requiring large meal volumes. Modern science has traced that effect to oleic acid, the primary monounsaturated fat in avocado, the same fat responsible for the Mediterranean diet's documented effects on metabolic health. Oleic acid slows gastric emptying, sustains satiety hormone levels, and reduces the post-meal blood sugar response that triggers fat storage signaling. A clinical study published in Nutrition Journal found that adding half an avocado to lunch reduced the desire to eat by 40% over the following 3 hours, compared to a lunch without avocado. But here's what most guides overlook. The highest concentration of beneficial compounds in avocado doesn't sit in the bright green flesh. It concentrates in the darker green layer directly beneath the skin, the portion most people discard when they scoop the fruit away from the peel. Peeling an avocado by hand. The way you'd peel a banana preserves this darker outer layer and maximizes the intake of the polyphenols and oleic acid concentrated there. The FDA has acknowledged avocado's polyphenol content as qualifying for a health claim related to heart disease risk reduction. Eat the whole fruit, as close to the skin as possible. Half at lunch. The hunger physics change measurably. Number 7. Eggs the oldest. This is the one worth waiting for. Set the scene. The 15th chapter of Numbers. The Israelites in the wilderness, exhausted, desperate for the foods they remembered from Egypt. The text records their longing, in precise detail: fish, cucumbers, melon, leeks, onions, and garlic. But hidden a few chapters earlier, in Leviticus, is a dietary framework that modern nutritional science has spent decades working toward. Eggs sit at the center of what Scripture calls clean, complete, nourishing food. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus specifically uses an egg as the archetype of a good gift, something a father would naturally offer a child who was hungry. Not a symbol of luxury, a symbol of the most fundamentally nourishing thing available. In ancient Egypt, eggs were placed in burial chambers as provisions for the afterlife. In Sanskrit medical texts, they were described as the food that contains everything needed to create life. Modern science has now mapped exactly why every culture that kept domestic fowl ate their eggs with reverence. A single egg contains 6 grams of complete protein with all 9 essential amino acids, plus choline, a nutrient essential for liver function and the transport of fat out of the liver. Fatty liver is increasingly recognized as a driver of insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction, which makes choline not a nutritional footnote, but a central mechanism of metabolic health. One egg provides approximately 25% of the daily adequate intake for choline. That isn't just ancient wisdom made legible. That's a description of a food engineered by biology to carry the full nutritional architecture of a living creature. A landmark study in the International Journal of Obesity found that overweight participants who ate 2 eggs for breakfast consumed significantly fewer calories across the rest of the day compared to those eating a calorie-equivalent bagel. The hormonal satiety response from egg protein and fat is a biological event, not a willpower event. The yolk matters. Don't discard it. The yolk carries the choline, the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and Ka, and the dietary cholesterol your body uses to manufacture hormones, including testosterone and estrogen, which regulate body composition in ways researchers are only beginning to map. 2 eggs in the morning. This is the cheapest, most complete fat loss breakfast available to any human being on Earth. Number 6. Chia seeds. The word chia is derived from the ancient Nahuatl word for strength. Aztec warriors carried chia seeds on long military campaigns as a concentrated energy source. Aztec runners, the famous messengers who traveled hundreds of miles across difficult terrain, carried a small pouch of chia seeds as their sole provision. Aztec physicians prescribed them for fatigue, digestive weakness, and weight management. When Spanish colonizers arrived and began systematically suppressing indigenous agricultural traditions, banning certain crops to break cultural identity, chia nearly disappeared from the historical record entirely for several centuries. Modern nutritional science has recovered what was nearly lost. Chia seeds absorb up to 12 times their own weight in liquid, forming a gel that physically expands in the stomach and triggers stretch receptors that send satiety signals to the brain. This isn't metaphorical fullness. It's structural. The gel also slows gastric emptying, blunts glucose absorption, and extends the satiety window by several hours. 2 tablespoons contain nearly 10 grams of fiber and a complete amino acid profile rare in plant foods. Here's the preparation detail that changes everything. Chia seeds need at least 15 minutes of hydration before consumption to begin their full expansion. When consumed, dry sprinkled on food and eaten, immediately they begin absorbing liquid inside the digestive tract before they can maximize their gel formation. The most effective protocol is to combine 2 tablespoons with a full glass of water or liquid. Wait 15 minutes, and then consume. The preformed gel maximizes the physical satiety effect. Chia pudding made overnight in the refrigerator produces the same result. The Aztec runners who carried chia across mountains were not carrying it dry. If this kind of ancient knowledge resonates with you, hit like and subscribe now, because what's coming next goes even deeper into the foods that changed human history. Number 5. Spinach. Spinach appears in 9th century Persian botanical records as a vegetable so valued, it was called the prince of vegetables. Arab physicians brought it westward along trade routes. By the time it reached European monastery gardens in the 11th century, Benedictine monks were cultivating it specifically as a fasting food, something that provided enough sustenance to maintain physical and mental function during long periods of reduced eating. Medieval physicians documented that spinach, consumed in large quantities during fasting periods, seemed to suppress the hunger that made fasting psychologically and physically difficult. They didn't know why. Modern research has identified the mechanism, thylakoids membrane structures found in plant chloroplasts that, when consumed, physically slow the digestion of dietary fat in the small intestine. Research published in the journal Appetite found that thylakoid-rich spinach extract led to prolonged release of the satiety hormones GLP-1 and CCK for hours after consumption. With a specific reduction in cravings for sweet and salty foods, spinach is also one of the richest dietary sources of magnesium, a mineral deficiency that is now recognized as widespread in adults over 60 and directly associated with insulin resistance, disrupted sleep, and poor blood sugar regulation, all of which are metabolically linked to fat gain and difficulty losing it. 1 cup of cooked spinach delivers approximately 37% of the daily recommended magnesium intake. A pound of raw spinach contains approximately 100 calories. This is the food the medieval monks were onto. Add it to everything. It disappears into flavor. The metabolic return is disproportionate to every other food at this calorie cost. Number 4. Flax seeds, the lignin secret that nobody talks about. Flax seeds appear in ancient Babylonian records from approximately 3000 BCE as a cultivated crop prized for both fiber and food. Ancient Egyptian weavers used flax for linen. Ancient Greek physicians used flaxseed poultices for skin inflammation. Hippocrates himself prescribed flaxseed tea for intestinal complaints. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, considered flax seeds so important to public health that he issued laws requiring their cultivation and consumption. He understood something that food processing later erased from our collective practice. Flax seeds operate on 3 simultaneous fat loss mechanisms. The soluble fiber forms a gel in the gut that slows glucose absorption and extends satiety. The alpha-linolenic acid, the richest plant source of this omega-3 fat in existence, reduces chronic inflammation, which is one of the most underappreciated biological drivers of fat retention. And the lignans. This is the mechanism almost no guide discusses. Flax seeds contain more lignans than any other food on Earth, up to 800 times more than the next highest source. Lignans are polyphenols with weak estrogenic activity that support hormonal balance, particularly in women navigating perimenopause and menopause, when fat redistribution and metabolic shifts make fat loss significantly more complex. Research suggests lignin consumption supports more favorable estrogen metabolism, potentially reducing the hormonal contributions to menopausal fat gain. The preparation detail that changes everything: the human digestive system cannot break down whole flax seeds. The outer hull is chemically resistant. Eating whole flax seeds means most of the lignans and omega-3 fats pass through completely unabsorbed. Ground flax seeds, milled fresh or stored in the refrigerator to prevent oxidation, release these compounds for absorption. 1 tablespoon of freshly ground flaxseed daily, added to oatmeal or yogurt, is the protocol. Ground flax oxidizes quickly at room temperature. Grind in small batches. Store cold. This is what Charlemagne's physicians knew. Number 3. Lentils, the food that saved armies. In the book of Genesis, Esau trades his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of red lentil stew. Scholars have long read this as metaphor. Nutritional historians read it as evidence that lentils were considered among the most sustaining foods in the ancient Near East, something worth significant exchange precisely because of their capacity to fully satisfy hunger. Lentil soup appears in ancient Sumerian clay tablets. Ancient Egyptian tomb paintings show lentils stored alongside grain as essential provisions for both this life and the next. Roman legions carried lentils on campaigns, specifically because they produced sustained physical energy without requiring refrigeration or complex preparation. A single cup of cooked lentils contains 18 grams of protein, 16 grams of fiber, and approximately 230 calories. That protein to fiber to calorie ratio is extraordinary among whole foods at any price point. Research published in Obesity Reviews found that legume consumption was associated with significantly greater weight loss and reduced waist circumference compared to controlled diets even without explicit calorie restriction. The dual satiety signal of protein and fiber, combined with one of the lowest glycemic indexes of any carbohydrate food, creates a metabolic environment where hunger genuinely quiets for hours. What most guides don't mention, lentils contain a specific type of resistant starch that actually increases when lentils are cooked and then cooled. Lentil soup, or lentil stew, that sits overnight in the refrigerator and is eaten the following day, has a measurably lower glycemic response than freshly cooked lentils because the cooling process converts digestible starch into resistant starch that passes through the small intestine without raising blood sugar and then feeds beneficial gut bacteria in the colon. Cook a large batch. Let it cool overnight. The ancient armies who carried cold lentil provisions were unknowingly optimizing this biochemical effect. Number 2. Blueberries. The anthocyanin metabolic signal. Wild blueberries and their close relatives have been harvested and consumed by indigenous peoples across the northern hemisphere for thousands of years. Native American healers across dozens of nations used wild blueberries to treat what their traditions described as excessive hunger, blood weakness, and inflammatory conditions. Finnish and Scandinavian folk medicine preserved dried bilberries, close botanical cousins, as winter medicines for metabolic and circulatory health. These were not decorative traditions. They were empirical observations accumulated over centuries of careful use. Modern research has identified the active mechanism, anthocyanins. The deep blue-purple pigments in the skin improve insulin sensitivity in muscle cells by activating a protein called GLUT4 that transports glucose into muscle tissue, rather than allowing it to accumulate in the bloodstream and drive fat storage. A study published in the Journal of Nutrition found that obese adults with insulin resistance who consumed blueberry smoothies daily for 6 weeks showed significantly improved insulin sensitivity compared to a control group. This is a clinically meaningful finding in exactly the population, adults with existing metabolic dysfunction, for whom it matters most. Here's the preparation nuance that most guides miss. Frozen wild blueberries actually contain higher anthocyanin concentrations than fresh cultivated blueberries sold in most grocery stores. Wild blueberries are smaller, with a higher skin-to-flesh ratio, which means a higher ratio of anthocyanin-containing skin per gram of fruit, and the freezing process ruptures cell walls, making these pigments more bioavailable. Upon thawing, a cup of frozen wild blueberries, thawed in the refrigerator overnight, delivers a more potent anthocyanin dose than a cup of fresh cultivated berries. This is not a minor distinction. For 6 weeks of daily consumption, it compounds. Number 1. Raw apple cider vinegar. With the mother, the ancient acid that modern metabolism needs. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, documented using vinegar as a therapeutic agent around 400 BCE. The ancient Babylonian Talmud records vinegar as a food used specifically to reduce excessive appetite. Egyptian papyri reference fermented grape and grain liquids for digestive and metabolic complaints. Roman legionaries carried a vinegar water drink called pasca as a daily provision, not for flavor, but because their physicians observed its sustained energy and reduced the excessive hunger that affected troops on long marches. In traditional Chinese medicine, vinegar, particularly grain vinegar, has been prescribed for over 3,000 years for what practitioners called liver stagnation and accumulation, which maps roughly to what modern medicine now identifies as insulin resistance and fatty liver. The specific compound at the center of all this cross-cultural observation is acetic acid. When you consume vinegar before a meal, acetic acid enters the bloodstream and does something precise. It inhibits an enzyme called sucrase that breaks down sucrose into glucose. This single action meaningfully slows the rate of carbohydrate digestion, producing a flatter blood sugar curve after the meal that follows. Research published in the journal Bioscience, Biotechnology, and Biochemistry found that daily consumption of apple cider vinegar over 12 weeks produced significantly greater reductions in belly fat, waist circumference, and visceral fat compared to a control group, even without other dietary changes. Acetic acid also appears to activate AMPK, adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase, a cellular enzyme often described as a metabolic master switch. When AMPK is active, it signals the body to stop storing energy and start burning it. It reduces the production of new fat in the liver. It improves glucose uptake in muscle cells. It suppresses the pathways that convert excess glucose into stored fat. This is why the Roman legionaries' instincts were sound. They were, without naming the mechanism, activating a metabolic switch that modern biochemistry has only recently identified. Now, here is the detail that virtually every guide on this topic omits, and it is the single most important practical point about this ingredient. The vinegar must contain what is called the mother, the colony of beneficial bacteria, enzymes, and proteins that form naturally during fermentation and appear as cloudiness or sediment in unfiltered apple cider vinegar. Commercial apple cider vinegar that has been pasteurized and filtered, the clear, bright amber product on most grocery store shelves, has had the mother removed. The acetic acid is still present and will still produce some of the metabolic effects described above, but the prebiotic bacteria in the mother, primarily strains of Acetobacter and Gluconobacter, deliver a separate and significant benefit. They seed and support the gut microbiome in ways that influence the production of short-chain fatty acids, the regulation of appetite hormones, and the reduction of intestinal inflammation. A product that has been pasteurized to kill bacteria has also had this layer of benefit stripped away entirely. The practical protocol: 1 to 2 tablespoons of raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar. The product should be visibly cloudy, and you should see sediment at the bottom of the bottle diluted in a full glass of water. Consumed 15 to 20 minutes before your 2 largest meals of the day. Never drink it undiluted. The acidity, over time, can damage tooth enamel and esophageal tissue. Always dilute. You can add a teaspoon of raw honey to improve palatability. The taste is sharp, slightly sour, faintly fruity. It is an acquired preference that most people develop within a week. What you will notice, if you sustain this protocol for 3 to 4 weeks, a quieting of the hunger that normally arrives sharply between meals, a reduction in the craving for sweet foods in the late afternoon, a flatter energy curve through the day, no spike after lunch, no crash at 3 o'clock. These are not placebo effects. They are the predictable biological consequences of improved blood sugar regulation and a shifting gut microbiome, in exactly the way Hippocrates observed them, without being able to name a single compound responsible. The ancient physicians didn't have clinical trials. They had thousands of patients, thousands of meals, thousands of observations, recorded and passed forward. The research is now beginning to examine precisely why their conclusions were so consistent. Before you go, there is one thing I want you to understand about everything on this list. One principle that runs through every single entry, and that most people who discover these foods never quite grasp. Every bioactive compound we've discussed today, the EGCG in green tea, the capsaicin in chili peppers, the beta-glucan in oats, the lignans in flaxseeds, the acetic acid in raw vinegar, the thylakoids in spinach, The anthocyanins in blueberries. Every single one of these compounds exists in its most potent, most bioavailable form in the food closest to its natural state. Minimally processed, minimally heated, minimally refined, e.g. CG, degrades at boiling temperature. Lignans require fresh grinding to be absorbed. The mother in vinegar is destroyed by pasteurization. Anthocyanins concentrate in the skin that most people peel away. Resistant starch in lentils increases when the food is cooled rather than served hot. Beta-glucan's satiety effects are strongest in steel-cut oats and weakest in instant oats, where the fiber architecture has been mechanically disrupted. Every step of industrial processing, heating, filtering, refining, homogenizing, instantizing is a step away from the biological activity that made these foods worth eating across 4,000 years of human history. This is not an argument against modern food systems. It is an argument for understanding what those systems cost you, nutritionally, at every step, and for making deliberate choices, when you can, to eat closer to what grew, fermented, or was prepared by hand, because the hands that shaped these preparations across centuries were doing something that preserves what our bodies need, and industrial convenience quietly removes. Here is the question I want to leave you with. If civilizations as different as ancient Rome, Han Dynasty China, medieval monastic Europe, and Aztec Mexico all independently arrived at the same metabolic conclusions about many of these same foods, what else did they know that we've quietly lost? If this video gave you something worth thinking about, hit like and share it with someone you care about, someone who deserves to know that the most powerful tools for their health are older than any pharmaceutical company and available at any grocery store. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And drop a comment below which of these 13 foods surprised you most. I read every single one. See you next week.